Hello, I'm Esther Githu-Yuat. It's Monday, April 11th. This is Africa 54.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa compares anti-migrant attacks to apartheid actions. The United States government will not hold anything against African countries who did not support United Nations resolutions against Russia. A U.S. State Department official speaks exclusively to VOA. And an overview of the exciting action at the Nile Conference of Season 2 of the Basketball Africa League.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa on Monday blasted vigilante groups for harassing migrants in the country, likening their behavior to strategies adopted by the apartheid regimes to target blacks. Scores of people have been staging demonstrations in recent months against the proliferation of undocumented migrants in the country. A Zimbabwean man was killed last week in an apparent mob attack in the northern Johannesburg township of Diepsloot. A small group of vigilantes had gone door to door demanding to identify documents after 7 people in the township had been murdered the previous weekend. Competition for jobs, especially in low-skilled sectors, is a factor in heightened anti-immigrant resentment. A South African court on Monday granted a further delay in former President Jacob Zuma's arms deal corruption trial, pending the outcome of his latest attempt to have the lead prosecutor removed from the long-running case. High Court Judge Pete Cohn adjourned the trial to May 17th to allow the president of the Supreme Court of Appeal to weigh a reconsideration application lodged by Zuma last week. Zuma was not in court Monday due to a health issue. Zuma, ousted as head of state in 2018 after 9 years in power, has pleaded not guilty to corruption charges, money laundering and racketeering over a $2 billion arms deal in the 1990s. At least 50 people were killed and dozens abducted by gunmen on Sunday in Nigeria's Plateau State, according to residents and a community leader. The Plateau State governor's spokesman says women and children were among those killed and kidnapped. Meanwhile, gunmen who carried out a high-profile attack on a train in northwest Nigeria last month have released a video purportedly showing about 24 of the hostages they kidnapped in the assault. In the 2-minute video, around 24 men and women are seen sitting in a forest area. Behind them are a group of gunmen standing in a line. One man is heard on the video saying in Hausa language, quote, "We are the passengers who left Abuja for Kaduna on the 28th of March. We were seized on our way." AFP could not independently verify the video, which was disseminated on social media. The CEO of Nigeria's Bank of Agriculture, Alwan Ali Hassan, appears in the recording. Nigeria's Vice President Yemi Osinbajo on Monday declared he would run for the nation's top job next year when incumbent Muhammadu Buhari is scheduled to step down. He is the latest figure from the two main parties to join the race to lead Nigeria. First elected as Buhari's deputy in 2015, Osinbajo made the announcement after months of speculation on whether he planned to succeed his boss. Now to the war in Ukraine. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said in an interview with Russian state television Monday that Moscow will not pause its military operation in Ukraine for future rounds of peace talks. European Union foreign ministers are meeting Monday to discuss another round of sanctions against Russia. And U.S. President Joe Biden is holding virtual talks Monday with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. India has taken a neutral stance in Ukraine as it continues to buy Russian oil and gas. Russian-backed military vehicles are on the move in Ukraine's Donetsk region near the port city of Mariupol. Fierce fighting between the Russian-backed forces and the Ukrainian army has brought devastation to a city of more than 400,000 people. Thousands have been hiding in basements with no running water, food, medicine or electricity, unable or unwilling to leave. Workers on Sunday were clearing rubble from the side of an apartment destroyed in the fighting as Mariupol residents waited in line to collect fresh water. The war in Ukraine has forced about 1/4 of Ukraine's 44 million people from their homes. The United Nations reports more than 4.5 million refugees have left the country. For more on the conflict, let's go to Associated Press reporter Philip Crowther, who is standing by live in Lviv, Ukraine. Philip, what's the latest on the ground?
Well, there are all these indications, right, that a Russian offensive was being prepared and maybe it is already underway. There is a clear attempt by the Russian armed forces to take over as much territory as possible in the Donbass region, that is the east of Ukraine. Now, remember that there is part of that region in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions that has been controlled by Russian-backed separatists since 2014. That area essentially has been handed over by them to Russian forces, and they are trying to get as much territory now as they can. Now, how are they doing that? Well, first of all, a big column of Russian armored vehicles is on its way south from around the Kharkiv direction in the northeast of the Donbass area. Those are heading toward the center of that Donbass region. And there are more movements from the south as well. In the southeast, by the way, that's of course where Mariupol is, the city that's been besieged since almost the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine already. There are now reports that one of the Russian-backed separatist leaders says that the port area of that city is now under their control. That would effectively bring the battle for Mariupol to an end, but we do not have confirmation of that from the Ukrainian side just yet.
So, Philip, are the 10 humanitarian corridors agreed upon on Saturday being used by Ukrainians now who are in besieged regions?
Well, look, they're being used, but whether they really lead those civilians to their desired destination is a completely different matter, because some of those humanitarian corridors have collapsed over the last few days. Why? Well, according to the Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister, who gives us that update every night on how the humanitarian corridors are doing, well, she says that some of those buses that are supposed to bring people out of the areas where they're supposed to be evacuated from to safety here in the west, for example, but some of those buses are being blocked by Russian forces. So there are still 9 humanitarian corridors which were supposed to work today. We don't know yet whether they actually did. They're supposed to get thousands of people out of besieged cities, but also those where Russian attacks are expected over the next few days and weeks, depending, of course, on how this conflict actually goes. And there are also evacuation trains being organized by the Ukrainian railways, which quite incredibly is still keeping these services going. Special evacuation trains, the normal train schedule, some of those are still working as well, trying to get people out of those areas that are really in danger of being attacked by Russian forces more and more, and getting those people to safety. A lot of those trains, by the way, come right here where we are in western Ukraine to Lviv, but it takes people over a day to get from eastern Ukraine to here.
And very briefly, what is President Zelensky asking for at this point?
Well, very briefly, weapons and sanctions. That's something that he has repeated to parliaments around the world since this conflict began. He spoke to the South Korean parliament today, again asking for deadly weapons from South Korea, which they are unwilling to give him right now. But he also wants sanctions, of course. An oil and gas embargo is believed, at least by the Ukrainian government, but also by many experts, to be something that can put the Russian economy and the Russian armed forces and the government, indeed, under some very, very serious pressure. But that is something that European Union countries altogether are not able to agree upon at this point.
Philip, thanks. Associated Press correspondent Philip Crowther reporting live from Lviv, Ukraine. The U.S. government says it will not hold anything against African countries who did not support UN resolutions against Russia. That's the message from Derek Chollet, counselor of the U.S. State Department. Chollet advises U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on a range of policy matters, including the Russia-Ukraine conflict. He spoke exclusively to Heidi Adams, the host of VOA's Straight Talk Africa.
We've now had 2 resolutions at the United Nations on Russia, and the most recent one around suspending Russia from the Human Rights Council. And African countries clearly not united on this issue. And observers have noted that Russia is likely taking notes. Is the United States taking notes? And how do you read the way African countries voted at the United Nations?
Well, first, we're not taking notes. We understand these are sovereign decisions by countries, and the United States is in constant contact with most members of the United Nations around these critical votes to talk about our views and make the case for why we think it's important for countries to vote the way they do. We think Russia's expulsion from the UN Human Rights Council is completely justified, given what we are seeing out of Ukraine. I mean, the horrors we have seen in places like Bucha, and I'm afraid those are not the last of the horrors we're going to be seeing as the tide recedes inside Ukraine. And as Russian troops withdraw further, I think we're only going to uncover more atrocities, more crimes against humanity inside Russia. So it's quite significant that the United Nations took the step. Only the second time in the UN Human Rights Council's history is a country being removed from the Human Rights Council. Countries vote for different reasons, and some countries have longstanding relationships with Russia. Some countries are just trying to navigate their way through this very difficult crisis, but yet we think that the overwhelming support of these UN General Assembly votes or the vote to expose Russia from the UN Human Rights Council sends a very clear message that the international community really is largely speaking with one voice here, that Russia's unprovoked, unjustified invasion of Ukraine needs to be condemned, and there need to be high costs associated with it. That said, we understand that this can put countries in a difficult situation. I mean, countries throughout Africa were already suffering from food crisis and food shortages, and this is only adding to that hardship. And so that's why the United States, working with others, is committed to doing whatever we can to try to mitigate the impact of the Ukraine war on global food prices, for example.
Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, sent a rather clear message when she said that there is no room for neutrality on the Russia-Ukraine issue. It makes one think of 2001, when then President George W. Bush told the world that you're either with us or against us in the war on terror, and that there was no room for neutrality then. Is this going to be America's approach at any point?
We just think, given what's going on in Ukraine, and Russia's unprovoked, unjustified, brutal war against Ukraine, the cost on thousands, millions of civilians, that the world needs to speak out against this. This is a very different situation than 20 years ago and the debates around the Iraq war. And this conflict is not just a conflict that's affecting Ukraine. It's not just affecting Europe, it's affecting the world, because the principles at stake, the principles of sovereignty, the principles that states can choose their own destiny, those are principles that every country throughout Africa and all around the world needs to try to uphold. So we don't think this is a time for business as usual. We do not think this is a time for neutrality. We think this is a time that we need to stand together to do whatever we can to support Ukraine, but also ensure that Russia pays a very high price for its decisions.
Be sure to watch Heidi's full interview with Derek Chollet on an upcoming episode of Straight Talk Africa. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54. Africa 54's new Facebook address is facebook.com/VOA Africa. We're streaming our broadcast live there. Still to come, we'll talk to South Sudan governor on the country's latest political developments. Stay with us.
How worried should the world be about the Wagner mercenary group? Join me, Heidi Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa as we'll explore Russia's rising influence in the Sahel region. We'll also talk to the Prime Minister of Cote d'Ivoire about his plans to keep the peace and create jobs in his country. Plus, we'll introduce you to the new president of the U.S. African Development Foundation. All this and more on the next Straight Talk Africa.
Season 2 of the Basketball Africa League is here. After a historic inaugural season, 12 national champions from across the continent are ready to compete for the 2022 BAL Championship. Tune in and follow the BAL on Voice of America. 54 countries, 12 teams, 1 continent, but only 1 champion. Game on.
Now to South Sudan, a nation that has been embroiled in political wrangling with on and off agreements between President Salva Kiir and Vice President Riek Machar. I'm joined in the studio by Governor Denay Chagor of Jonglei State. Governor, it's great to have you in the studio with us today. Let's start there. Just early this month, President Salva Kiir and Vice President Riek Machar agreed to resume talks and have their forces meet and continue the discussions to move the country forward. Do we know if these rival forces have already begun the talks?
Well, Esther, thank you so much for having me, and I'm so glad to be here in Washington, D.C. and here with you. Of course, South Sudan has been going through this period of turmoil, but with determination from South Sudanese people to make sure that we put our country first above any interest or any influence. So we signed this peace agreement, the revitalized peace agreements, and we are working on implementation of this peace agreement. So when it comes to the security arrangement, which you just asked, last week, the President Salva Kiir and Dr. Riek Machar, the leader of SPLM-IO, and the other political parties, signed an agreement that will allow the country to form the unified forces that the agreement asked for. And so far it's going so well. And soon we will have the unified force in South Sudan.
Hopefully, because, you know, they've signed them on and off. They break apart, you know, one goes one way, the other one goes one way. And then the people of South Sudan are left wondering, are we ever going to have a country? This is the youngest nation in Africa. And you're yet to realize stability in the country. Do you believe that this time round, these agreements will hold?
I personally believe that. I do know that because I'm part of that agreement. I'm part of the negotiation of this agreement, and I'm also part of the implementation of this agreement. So in any agreement, anywhere in the world, you know, there's always ups and downs. And that's why it's called an agreement, because it means that you don't get all you want, and the other side don't get all they want. And these are the same things that this agreement does in South Sudan. So we are taking, you know, critical steps to it. And something that people need to know about this agreement is that it's very complicated. It was negotiated in 2 separate countries. The first portion of it was negotiating in Ethiopia, and then the last portion of it was negotiated in Khartoum. The 2 portions of it, you know, there are some part of it that we, the South Sudanese people, have to now go and negotiate and move on with it. So there has been a lot of time where, you know, we move on and then we find a stumbling block, and then the parties go into negotiation among themselves, find a solution to it, and move on with it. So this is how it has been going. And so far, we are very hopeful and very optimistic.
Very optimistic. Let's hope that this works. But let's move on to the ongoing food crisis in South Sudan. Of course, the whole region of the Horn of Africa area, you know, Somalia, they are affected by the drought. However, in Sudan, there have been ethnic clashes, intercommunal violence that prevent people from going to tend to their farms. What are you doing specifically in the state of Jonglei, where you're governor, to address this situation?
You know, those things has been happening because of the insecurity. And that's why we are, you know, moving as fast as we can to make sure that, one, we have the unified force that can take, you know, security of all the citizens in the country. Number 2, we want to make sure that, you know, people return back to their home, to their livelihood. So the first priority for every South Sudanese now is to make sure that we have a peace agreement that's in place that put the security of our people first, that put the security of our country first. And so with this intercommunal violence and the conflicts, those has been there, but, you know, we're not saying that the government can't do anything about it. We are working so hard to make sure that all the stakeholders, from villages to small towns, you know, the chief, everybody have the stakes and get involved into making sure that our people are secure and that our people return homes.
And very briefly, women's rights, especially in Jonglei State. Every woman I've spoken to from South Sudan talks about not being heard. They're only seen. What are you doing about that?
What we're doing about it is that in this peace agreement that we are implementing, it gives 35% to women. And now, as political parties, we are making sure that 35% is guaranteed to every woman in South Sudan, but not just women who does not have a political party, because we are implementing the peace agreement. We are doing that and also calling, on the entire country to put women's rights first, to put women's rights at front, because these rights are God-given rights. These are not government-given rights, or, these are the rights that every woman enjoyed everywhere in the world, even here in the United States. So we want to make sure that we do that. But as we are implementing the peace agreement, those rights also goes into, scrutiny, and so, there are ups and downs.
I remember this interview,
Very good.
Governor, and hold you to account
Thank you so much.
if we don't hear
You can do
women's
that.
rights in South Sudan. Thank you so much, Governor Chagor.
Thank you.
Denay Chagor is the governor of South Sudan, Jonglei State. The Nile Conference of Season 2 of the Basketball Africa League opened over the weekend. Here's VOA's Jackson Vunganyi with the highlights.
Zamalek was up by 7 early in the game, but Cobra Sports' Wang finds Kia, who dunks it in for 2.
Statement has been made, and that man Kia makes his mark.
Egypt's Strawberry Jr. finds McKinney, who gets the ball to Farag with a back and forth to Mohamed, but Farag gets in position for a three-pointer and scores. With 4 minutes left in the first half, Zamalek's Diogo gets close to the basket for 2 and scores. Elsam Mohamed finds Strawberry Jr. for 3, putting Zamalek's lead to 5 with just over a minute to go in the half. The ball gets loose as Strawberry Jr. gets a pass to Diogo, who goes for a one-handed dunk. With 3 minutes left in the third, Cobra's Diu misses the 3, and Zamalek's Mohamed is there with a rebound to Mbop, who gets 2 points. Egypt up by 12 when McKinney passes to Farag for 3 to extend their lead to 15.
It's a beautiful drop in from Farag.
Cobra's Harrington scores for 2 and gets fouled as the third quarter comes to an end. McKinney finds Strawberry Jr., who goes right through the middle and scores as his team leads by double digits.
Goes right through the middle, right through the middle.
Just over 5 minutes left in the game, and Zamalek Sosa gets 2 in.
Man, oh, that's lovely, lovely.
El Sayed at the free throw line and misses with 1 second left, but it doesn't change the outcome as Zamalek triumphs over Cobra Sport in the first game of the Nile Conference, 80-63. FAP dominates this one in the end by 17. Petros Goncalves makes his way to the basket and scores the first 2 points of the game.
Scored by Jason Gonsalves.
Down by 2 in the first quarter, Petros Dandao finds Goncalves, who passes to Moraes and hits a 3.
Bit of time, drop it in, and look at that, this is ridiculous.
Moraes gets the ball to Dandao, who finds Gonco, but it goes back to Dandao for 3 to keep the score close.
Oh, that's a beautiful three-pointer.
Angola's Moreira picks up a defensive rebound and passes to Domingos, who makes a three-pointer, pushing their lead to 11.
Transition opportunity. Crikey, this is ridiculous.
With just 3 minutes left in the half, Angola's Pedro gets close to the basket for 2, but is blocked, and Cape Town's Ganapamo heads down the court and scores. Up by 6, Moraes drops in 2 and extends Petro's lead to 8.
He's on fire.
Moreira manages to get 2 points for his team despite tough defensive play by the Tigers. Just over a minute to go in the third, and Moraes finds Domingos for 3, getting Angola even higher on the scoreboard. Petros Domingos passes to Paulo, who passes to Moraes and scores.
He's
Down by 20 with 9 minutes left in the game, South Africa tries to come back as Prince Lou finds Ganapamo, who makes a one-handed dunk. Petro continues to dominate in the fourth quarter as Domingos passes to Cipriano for a 3. A tough loss for the Cape Town Tigers as Petro de Luanda wins this one by 29 points.
Thank you, Jackson, for the highlights on BAL. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website, at our new Facebook page, facebook.com/VOA Africa. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.